Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be doing a Classic Collection budget deck, and this is going to be an upgrade of the Blue Source Removal budget deck. So Blue Source Removal is still getting support even in the Classic Collection, and the Classic Collection offers us a new line for Zoodomon to be playing around with, and it's looking to be pretty good and pretty powerful of cards, adding some extra control elements into the deck that it didn't have before. So without further ado, onto the deck profile. Starting off with the Digitama, I'm going to be running one copy of Bukamon. So Bukamon is just the 5th Digitama of the deck. It could really be anything you want it to be, but I do like Bukamon for the added source removal that he offers. With his when attacking ability, you get to trash the Digivolution source at the bottom of one of your opponent's Digimon if it's level 4 or less. So this is just more source removal for, well, a source removal deck, and that's just pretty good. But the main Digitama of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Kiaromon. So Kiaromon is going to be the main Digitama because, well, it's doing something a little bit more than what the deck is already doing. So this card is acting as the dedicated draw engine for the deck, where it has this nice inheritable ability where during your turn once per turn, when one of the opponent's Digivolution sources is removed by a card effect, then we get to draw 1 card. So this is really important just because, well, we have lots of different ways of removing the opponent's inheritable sources, so that means we have lots of ways to potentially draw cards, digging through our deck and seeing the cards that we need to see to increase the overall consistency, making this card just the more ideal Digitama, so that way we could try to, well, actually see the cards that we need to see. Next, on to the rookies, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Elecmon. So Elecmon is just that value-efficient vanilla card, where we're just playing this card solely based on his stats alone. But this is a flex spot of the deck, and it could be really any rookie you feel like you want to run. I just think having a value vanilla card just a hard play when we need it to, or as a cheap Digivolution with some decent DP, is just that good still. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Blucomon. So Blucomon is a really important card for the deck because he has this very powerful inheritable ability where during your turn once per turn, when you trash a Digivolution source from one of your opponent's Digimon, then you get to gain 1 memory. So this comboed with Kiaromon is just part of the ideal stack, so that way when you remove a source, then you're going to be gaining a memory and drawing a card, and that's just helping not only with the overall consistency of the deck, but the efficiency of the deck as well. Because if you just have a field of lots of Blucomons in the inheritable sources of your Digimon, then you could potentially gain lots of memory, and with that memory, make some very powerful follow-up plays with. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Gizamon. So Gizamon is a pretty solid card to be using. This is another flex spot. It doesn't necessarily have to be Gizamon if you don't want it to be, but I think Gizamon is pretty good just because he has this nice inheritable ability that's potentially DP boosting our Digimon. So what his inheritable ability states is during your turn, while the opponent has no Digimon with Digivolution sources in it in play, then this Digimon gains plus 2000 DP. So we do kind of want our Digimon to be as strong as they possibly can, so Gizamon is just a very solid and easy way to potentially DP boost our Digimon with a sizable boost. But speaking of DP boosting, the last rookie of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Gabumon. So this is the starter deck Gabumon, and this Gabumon is really good for the deck just because, well, he's DP boosting our Digimon a little bit more consistently than Gizamon. So what this card is doing is he has the inheritable ability where during all turns, so it's not only just during your turn but the opponent's turn as well, while you have 8 or more cards in your hand, then this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP. So this will make it a little bit harder for the opponent to interact with your Digimon during their turn, and it'll make our Digimon a little bit stronger during our turn as well, making Gabumon just a really good card, especially since we have very easy ways in the deck to try to draw cards. Next, on to the champions, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Gorillamon. So this is another flex spot of the deck. I just think that you do need some efficiency cards in order to digivolve it into your higher stages as quickly as possible, and Gorillamon is fulfilling that goal quite nicely. The big difference between Gorillamon and Tobiomon is the fact that Tobiomon is just easier to hard play when we don't see a rookie, but it has lower DP as a result. So if you want something with a little bit less punch, then something like Gorillamon, because Gorillamon does have 6000 DP, then Tobiomon works just as well. But I think this slot, dedicating it to a tempo efficient card, is just really valuable, so that way we could try to get into our higher stages as quickly as possible. Next, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Lobomon. So Lobomon is going to be in alternate win condition because, well, hybrids win games. Allowing him to Digivolve on top of one of our Tamers as if it was a level 3 Digimon is just very powerful, because we could leave a Tamer open, take out all of the opponent's security, and then if we have the memory to make a follow-up play, we could Digivolve the Tamer into Lobo and swing for game. And I can't tell you how many times that works in various other decks, so it should work in this deck, and it's just a very powerful maneuver to be doing. On top of the fact that if we don't need to use him as a win condition, or we can't use him as a win condition, then he's still a level 4 for us to be using as, well, just a generic level 4. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Sieleman. So Sieleman is a really good Digimon just because it's acting as the deck's dedicated blocker. If you wanted to, you could run Gizamon in its place, but Sieleman is a little bit more tempo efficient than Gizamon. So if you wanted to run a combination of the two, by all means do so. If you want to run one versus the other, again, by all means do so. All we really care about is the fact that this is a blocker slot for the deck, and I do like the tempo efficiency, so that way we don't have to use it as a blocker. In case we want to try to use it to Digivolve into our higher stages with, then we have that level of flexibility available to us on how we could use our cards. And then the last champion of the deck is going to be 2 copies of the brand new classic version of Ikakumon. So Ikakumon is a very powerful Digimon for this deck to be playing around with, because he has this nice ability where during your turn, this Digimon can attack your opponent's unsuspended Digimon with no Digivolution sources. So if the whole idea is us trying to remove the opponent's Digivolution sources, well, this is a really powerful card to be playing around with it, because it'll actually allow us to attack into the opponent's Digimon for not having any inheritable Digivolution sources. Most of the time, it's going to be on the rookies that he's going to be picking off, but the fact that he does have 6,000 DP, and we could potentially boost him to 7,000 or 8,000, or even higher depending on what your deck is looking like, just makes this a very powerful card to run to try to pick off the opponent's low-level Digimon, because those are going to be the easiest ones to remove all of the inheritable sources with. Next, on to the ultimates, I'm going to be running 3 copies of CrysPaledramon. So CrysPaledramon is still just a very powerful card for this deck to be playing around with, because of all of the potential synergy that he has and what he's doing for the deck. So what he's doing for the deck is he has a powerful when Digivolving ability native to him, where you get to trash 1 Digivolution source off the bottom of all of the opponent's Digimon, which is really powerful because it's a good way to pick off lots of inheritables all at once. And then on top of that, what he's doing, and the main reason why we want to use him for the deck, is for his inheritable ability, where during your turn, while the opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it in play, then this Digimon gains security attack +1, allowing us to, well, punch the opponent's security even harder than we normally would, allowing us to deal extra damage onto their security, which is really powerful because we're trying to pressure them for game, and then that's what allows us to open up plays where we get to Lobo for game. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Majiramon. So Majiramon, like CrysPaledramon, is just that good of a card to still be running because of, well, all of his native synergies and combo play with the deck. So he has 2 abilities, one native to him, one inheritable. The ability native to him is very powerful because it's a when Digivolving ability. You get to trash the top card of one of the opponent's Digimon's Digivolution sources. So most of the time we're trashing from the bottom. This is trashing from the top. So we get to kind of pick and choose what we're going to be doing and how we're going to be tackling the situation that the opponent's going to be giving us based on their inheritables. So having that difference on where we get a trash is very powerful. And then on top of that, it also has another really powerful inheritable ability where it's a when attacking ability once per turn. If your opponent has no Digimon with Digivolution sources in it in play, then you get to unsuspend this Digimon, allowing your Digimon to multi-attack, and that's basically almost the exact same as being able to do 1 security, except it has some different lines of play where we could actually use it with some different megas for, well, not necessarily aggro purposes, but for control purposes now too. And then the last ultimate of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Zoodomon. So this is the brand new classic version of Zoodomon, and what this card is doing is almost the exact same thing as the Ikakumon we just saw from the classic collection. So he has this nice ability where during your turn, this Digimon can attack into the opponent's unsuspended Digimon with no Digivolution sources, offering that control type element that the deck didn't necessarily have before. So now we have more ways to interact with the opponent's Digimon, and that's just pretty powerful, considering he's also really strong for a level 5. And then on top of that, to make his other ability a little bit easier, he even has a when Digivolving ability where you get to trash one Digivolution source from the bottom of one of the opponent's Digimon, so that way you could try to Digivolve up into him, trash a source, and then try to swing and delete the Digimon by attacking into it because, well, you removed a source, making it so it had none, paired up with some of your other cards to potentially get rid of all of their other evolution sources on the card you're trying to attack into. So it's just a very powerful card to be playing around with because of the new control type elements that it's offering for the deck. Next, on to the Megas, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Vikemon. Yes, Vikemon from BT02 is still a halfway decent budget card to be playing around with because he's just generically good. So what he's doing is he has the very powerful ability where during your turn, if your opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources, then this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP and security attack plus 1. So this is really good on Majiramon and CrysPaledramon because Majiramon will allow you to multi-attack with security attack plus 1, essentially breaking 4 security, and CrysPaledramon just adds an extra security attack, making it so he could break 3 security. So there's no real wrong answer on which one to Digivolve into, and even if you just have to Digivolve on top of Zoodomon, it's still pretty powerful of a card to be using, just because he natively has 12,000 and he'll boost himself to 13,000, and that's just pretty decent. And then the last mega of the deck is going to be 3 copies of Plisiomon. So this is the classic version of Plisiomon, and this Plisiomon is doing something very similar to the Zudamana and Ikakumon that we just added into the deck, adding some extra control elements into the deck on top of being a good resource and value engine himself. So what this card is exactly doing is he has the nice powerful ability where during your turn, this Digimon can attack into the opponent's unsuspended Digimon with no Digivolution sources. So again, just another way to try to attack into the opponent's Digimon, and that's pretty powerful having them at various different levels, so that way we have different ways to aggress and control onto the opponent. And then on top of that, he also has another ability where during your turn, once per turn, when one of your opponent's Digivolution sources is trashed, then we get to draw 2 cards, allowing the deck to be even more consistent than it is, allowing us to actually try to make some very powerful follow-up plays, or try to find the parts and pieces that we need in order to continue the pressure onto the opponent. So this is just another really good complementary card added to the deck, all thanks to the Classic Collection. Next, on to the options, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Howling Memory Boost. So Howling Memory Boost is just that good of a card to be running, and this card just is super powerful and super synergistic with everything the deck is trying to do. So what this card is doing is, well, it's a memory boost, so it'll have the delay ability to gain 2 memory at a later turn, which is just very, very good because it actually allows us to make some very easy and consistent follow-up plays with. And then what we're really trying to use the card for on top of the delay ability is the fact that we could trash 2 of the opponent's inheritable sources from the bottom of one of their Digimon, and then one of their Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it in play can't attack or block until the end of the opponent's next turn. So this is just very powerful because, well, 1, it's trashing the opponent's inheritables, and 2, it's stopping their Digimon from doing anything, all in an option while gaining us 2 memory, and having the security ability to place itself into the battle area to use the delay ability at worst. So this card is just really, really powerful, especially since we have multiple ways and multiple cards to reward us for trashing the opponent's inheritables. So this is just a really good card to run for all of its synergies. And then the last option of the deck, which I'm arguably debating on wanting to try to bump up to 4, is going to be 2 copies of Ice Wall. So Ice Wall is just an absolutely insane defensive card for the deck to be playing around with. So this card, for only costing 1, gives the main ability where all of the opponent's Digimon gain the ability of, when attacking, losing 2 memory until the end of the turn. So for essentially 1 memory, you basically get to turn off the opponent's ability to attack unless they have just a whole bunch of memory, and then they're going to be losing memory every time they're going to be swinging, so it really deters them from wanting to attack at all. And well, this is basically just doing exactly what you want it to do, trying to stall out the opponent so that way you could figure out different ways to aggress onto the opponent and set up very powerful lines of play. So this card is absolutely insane for that main ability alone, but on top of that, it even has a Hammer Spark-like security ability where you get to just gain 2 memory, potentially ruining the opponent's turn or taking away potential plays, because while gaining 2 memory for you when it's checked in the security is effectively taking away 2 memory from the opponent, and that could be pretty brutal at times. And then lastly, onto the Tamers, I'm going to be running 1 copy of Matt Ishida. So if you wanted to, this should probably be Davis. Davis is just the better overall tamer, but Matt is still a pretty decent tamer because it's a solid memory fixing tamer on a budget. So it's still accomplishing that main role where it's setting your memory to 3 if you have anything less than 3 memory, which is really important so that way you could play your cards as consistently as you possibly can and as efficiently as you possibly can, which is always important. And then it also has a nice upside where during your turn, if you play a blue Digimon, you could suspend this tamer to trash the source of one of the opponent's Digimon from the bottom. So this is just more source removal if we're playing our Digimon, which combos really nicely with Elecmon, or if you wanted to run Bukamon instead of Gorillamon, it combos really nicely with that as well. So we do have ways and we do have cards that we do want to potentially hard play, making this Matt a pretty solid card to be using, but I do again think Davis is just the better overall memory fixing tamer, just because he helps with the deck's overall consistency. And then the last tamer of the deck is going to be 3 copies of Sora and Joe. If you really wanted to, you could just run 4 copies of Sora and Joe and cut the memory fixing tamer out entirely, but I do like the combo and synergy that having a memory fixer and a duo tamer has together, making for some very powerful plays possible. So what this card is doing is it has the nice ability where at the start of your turn, if the opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it in play, then you get to gain 2 memory. This does also stack with all of your other Sora and Joes, so the more Sora and Joes you have, the more memory you could potentially gain, which is really, really powerful. And then on top of that, what we're really using this card for is also its secondary ability, where during your turn, when one of your blue Digimon attacks, you get to suspend this tamer to trash the bottom 2 Digivolution sources off of one of the opponent's Digimon, which is just really, really powerful because, again, this could stack, so that way we could easily trash entire stacks of the opponent's inheritables, allowing for our cards like Plisiomon, Zoodomon, and Ikakumon to be able to attack into the opponent's Digimon very, very easily with. So Sora and Joe is the most ideal tamer for us to be running as a result. And then we still have so many other cards to think about playing with the deck, just because the simple theme of source removal is just starting to be that expansive. So we do have other Digitamas that we could think about running in the deck. So if you wanted to, you could run Upamon. Upamon is probably the best Digitama for the deck to be running, but it might be a little bit expensive depending on the version that you're looking for. But this is still just acting as a solid card draw engine for the deck, except this time it's when attacking instead of just when we remove an inheritable. So it's a little bit easier to trigger its ability more recursively, making it the ideal Digitama to be running. And then if you do want to go with some DP boosting, we do have other cards to help it DP boost in the Digitama slot. Then we do have lots of counter tech cards that we could be playing around with in blue. So we do have Ikakumon to try to stop the opponent from reducing their Digivolution costs. And then on top of that, we even have Madoki Betamon to stop the opponent from gaining memory on anything but a tamer. So there's 2 very powerful counter tech cards to consider playing around with, and if they're both sitting passively on the field, then it's going to be very obnoxious for the opponent to, well, play their cards as efficiently as they wanted to. Then we do have some other really decent cards to be playing around with to try to continue the theme of trying to remove the opponent's evolution sources. So we do have Gomamon acting very similar as the promo Gabumon, where the classic Gomamon is just an on-play, trash out one of the opponent's inheritables from the bottom, which is never a bad thing. especially since we have more cards like the promo Gorillamon to just gain us benefits for trashing the opponent's inheritables, which is essentially what the deck is still trying to do, and Gorillamon gaining us a memory similar to Blucomon is just that good, so we do want to try to see this type of ability as consistently as you can, so this Gorillamon is just that good for the deck because of it. Then we do have other ways of removing the opponent's inheritable sources. Then we also have a little bit of attribute synergy to be thinking about playing around with. So Vikemon is a free type Digimon, so we could actually use EX01 to give Vikemon jamming, which a Vikemon swinging for 4 security because of Majiramon and having jamming just seems to be very, very powerful, on top of the fact that we could actually use EX01 to aggress with himself because he natively has jamming too. So there is just some other synergies that we could even start thinking about based on attributes alone. Then, as I mentioned before, there's just a whole bunch of other substitute cards in the deck that you could be running. So Grizzlymon is a good substitute for Sieleman if you wanted to run an alternate blocker. Then you just have a whole bunch of other tempo efficiency cards, like I mentioned, like Tobiomon and Monzimon, if you just want to use them to hard play and Digivolve for relatively cheap. So there's just a good amount of substitutes based on stat lines alone. Then we even have Coelamon to think about, just because Coelamon is one of the more powerful security Digimon we have to be playing around with, because not only will he play himself for free when he's checked from the security, but he has the on-play ability of allowing us to draw 2 cards, making our deck that much more consistent, as well as spawning a free body from him just literally coming out of the security. But speaking about drawing 2 cards, we also have Zoodomon from BT1 to think about, just hard playing, because he'll hard play us and draw us 2 cards as well. Even though he's not a security Digimon, it's not necessarily the worst thing to do in the world in case we're stuck and we don't see anything else. And then on top of that, he does have a nice inheritable ability of when attacking, gaining 1 memory, for the opponent having a Digimon with no Digivolution sources, so he just does have some good synergy in combo play with the deck as well. Then we do have some more control-type elements in the form of Coelamon trying to de-incentivize or turn off the opponent's ability to attack. Same thing with just upgrading the deck to make it the full powerful version of the deck, with Hexablaumon doing a very similar thing. And then one of the more complementary upgrades to the deck is just also running Azulongmon, just because Azulongmon is a very powerful card in his own right, allowing you to trash the bottom Digivolution source off of all of the opponent's Digimon. So again, more powerful source removal that we can make efficient, especially since he's already making that efficient. With the other part of his when Digivolving ability to gain the memory back for each one, with no Digivolution sources, and he'll even become super powerful when attacking, because for each of the opponent's Digimon without inheritable sources, then he'll gain security tech +1, pair that up with multi-attacking or an extra security tech +1, and you could potentially punch the opponent's security very hard with him. Then we do have level 7s to think about, so we do have all of the Omnimons if you wanted to run any of the Omnimons. And then as far as some really powerful alternate option cards, we do just have Blue Memory Boost if you do just want to try to up your deck's overall consistency with looking at the top 4 for Blue Digimon, plus the delay ability of gaining 2 memory. And then we do just have Hammer Spark we could also think about running because, well, it's Hammer Spark, it's one of the best blue options in the game. And then blue has just a ton of bounce effects that you could be playing around with. So you could use Rattlestar, Cocytus Breath, Absolute Blast. There's just a whole bunch of them that could bounce the opponent's Digimon and maybe do some other benefits. But they're just that powerful of cards to run because it's one of the only control type tools that we have to use in option form, outside of just using the new line of Digimon we got from the Classic Collection to try to swing into the opponent's Digimon to get rid of them that way. But for the most part, this is just my interpretation of a budget source removal deck, and I think even on a budget, it's still very, very powerful, and it could still perform relatively well, even though you still are probably just better investing a little bit extra into getting the Azulong and the Hexablau to make the deck even stronger. I still think Vikemon and Plisiomon have their own levels of viability, and I think that this is going to be a very fun deck to play casually, and it could even still perform relatively well and might even take people by surprise because they might be expecting something different out of this type of a deck. So I think this is going to be a very fun deck to be playing around with, and like I said, it's very powerful and it has some very easy upgrade paths for you to take when you're ready to invest a little bit more into this style of deck. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.